The US and the EU are like that couple that's been together forever. They bicker, they squabble, they occasionally threaten to throw the good china at each other, but at the end of the day, they're stuck together. And their relationship, much like a long marriage, is built on a foundation of trade. We're talking trillions of dollars in goods and services flowing back and forth across the Atlantic every year. Cars from Germany, wine from France, airplanes from America. You get the picture. Now, like any good power couple, there are going to be some disagreements, and in the world of trade, those disagreements often center around one thing: the trade balance. In simple terms, who's selling more stuff to whom? Is one side getting a better deal than the other? Well, that's what we're here to find out. So buckle up, folks, because we're about to dive headfirst into the murky waters of the US-EU trade relationship. The US-EU trade relationship tells a tale of two economies. The US runs a trade deficit in goods with the EU. America buys more cars, machinery, and clothes from Europe. Some see this as a loss of American jobs and money, but there's another side. The US excels in services like finance and tech. Here, the US enjoys a surplus with the EU. So, how do we weigh these forces, goods versus services? It's like comparing apples and oranges. Let's be honest, nobody likes red tape. But in the world of international trade, it's about as unavoidable as death and taxes. And when it comes to the US and the EU, there's plenty of red tape to go around. From the US perspective, European regulations can sometimes feel like a bureaucratic maze designed to keep American products out. Food safety standards, environmental regulations, you name it. The US has often argued that these rules are more about protectionism than anything else. Then there's the issue of tariffs, those pesky little taxes on imported goods. While the US and EU have a relatively low average tariff rate compared to other trading partners, there are still some sectors where tariffs are a major sticking point. Think agricultural products, for example. The EU has long protected its farmers with tariffs and subsidies, making it difficult for American farmers to compete on a level playing field. From the US perspective, it all feels a bit unfair. Now let's hop across the pond and get the European perspective on this whole trade balance kerfuffle. The EU argues that its regulations are in place to protect its citizens and the environment, not to stifle trade. They point out that their standards are often higher than those in the US and that American companies are perfectly capable of meeting them if they want to sell their products in Europe. When it comes to tariffs, the EU argues that its agricultural policies are designed to ensure food security and support rural communities. They also point out that the US has its own set of agricultural subsidies, so it's not exactly coming to the table with clean hands. Ultimately, the EU maintains that the trade balance is simply a reflection of consumer preferences and market dynamics. Europeans like their German cars and their French wines, and they're willing to pay a premium for them. So, is the US-EU trade balance really unfair? Well, it's complicated. Some in the US feel aggrieved. They see a trade deficit and cry foul. They point to tariffs and regulations. But the EU has a point too. Their regulations protect their citizens and environment. The US benefits from trade with the EU, especially in services. Fairness in trade is a slippery concept. Many factors make it hard to say who gets a better deal. The US-EU trade relationship is complex and intertwined. It benefits both sides, even if it doesn't always feel that way. It requires communication, compromise, and perspective.